static. That's all the ship's communication officer heard at first, crackling white noise stretching across the void. But beneath the chaos of sound there was structure. A rhythm, a pattern. It wasn't random. It was language. On the edge of the Perseus Arm, deep within the Federation's outer colonies, a small human research vessel picked up the most desperate message in galactic history. A distress beacon, weak and fragmented, its source buried under light years of interference. But it wasn't directed at humanity, not even close. The message was meant for someone else entirely. It came from a distant world, Valora Prime, a place humanity had never charted, never visited, never even heard of. And yet, by some cosmic misalignment, the beacon's signal had bounced, refracted, and scattered until it landed squarely in human hands. The captain leaned over the console as the translator struggled to reconstruct the alien plea. "Anyone. Please, our skies burn. They're taking our children, our fleets are gone." Then silence. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The voice was weak, terrified, and definitely not human. But the tone, the desperation, that was universal. The distress call was filed. It should have ended there. Another anomaly logged, another mystery tossed into the archives. But humanity has never been good at ignoring cries for help. Within a week, the recording had traveled far beyond the small research ship. It reached the communications arrays orbiting Mars, then the Naval Command on Luna, and finally, the Unified Earth Defense Network, where men and women who'd grown up on stories of resistance, rebellion, and survival listened in silence. The analysts said the message wasn't meant for them. The linguists said the coordinates were unreliable. The politicians said it wasn't Earth's problem, and yet, somewhere deep inside, humanity remembered what it felt like to be desperate. To send a signal into the dark and pray someone answered. So they answered. When the first response was transmitted, it was simple and human. Message received. Help is on the way. No one could have imagined what that promise would start. Across human space, starship yards lit up as if preparing for war. Civilian vessels were repurposed. Old warships, relics from the Martian rebellion, were pulled from orbiting museums and rearmed. The call had reached not just the military, but the people. News networks spun with speculation. Scientists debated what kind of species would reach out to strangers across the void. Others argued that it wasn't their fight, that humanity was overreaching again, trying to play hero in a galaxy that didn't ask for them. But in the spacefaring taverns of Titan, in the scrapyards of Ganymede, in the training halls of Luna, there was a different kind of whisper. They asked for help. Then we help. The first fleet to depart was small, scouts, medships, and a handful of heavy cruisers. It wasn't an armada yet, not even close, but it was the start of something colossal, something that would rewrite the way the galaxy saw humans. And on Valora Prime, the alien leaders who sent that accidental plea had no idea who, or what, was coming. They had meant to reach their own allies, a neighboring empire known for mercy and restraint. Instead, they had called upon the one species in the stars that turned every battle into a lesson in defiance. A mistake born of desperation. A signal sent into the dark. And humanity, ever eager, ever reckless, answered with the one thing it knew best, hope wrapped in steel. The galaxy would never be the same. Valora Prime was dying. Once a world of sapphire oceans and crystal spires, now its skies were blackened with smoke. The Sithrak Dominion, an empire of merciless conquerors, had come without warning, consuming planet after planet, leaving only silence in their wake. The Valorans, gentle by nature and scholars by culture, had no armies left. Their fleets, crafted for exploration and diplomacy, had been reduced to burning wrecks within days. The Dominion didn't come to negotiate, they came to harvest. In the planet's last surviving command bunker, the High Council gathered around a flickering holotable. The ground trembled from another orbital bombardment. "Signal strength is fading," said a young technician, her voice trembling. "If the relay fails, no one will hear us." "They must hear us," replied Elder Saren, the last of the Council's founders. His silver eyes were dull with exhaustion. "We sent the coordinates to the Arkan Alliance. They've always come when we called." He didn't know that the signal had gone astray, that a tiny gravitational anomaly, millions of kilometers away, had bent its path across the stars, toward a species the Valorans had never met. Hours passed. Days. The skies continued to burn. And still, no reply. Some among the council whispered that the Archons had abandoned them. Others believed the message had been intercepted, that the Sithrak had silenced every possible savior. Hope was fading. Then one morning the technicians reported something strange. "We're detecting a response." Every head turned. "From the Archons?" "Unknown. The encryption is crude, almost. Primitive. Primitive." The word carried weight among the Valorans, a people who measured progress not in wars fought but in centuries of peace. Yet through that primitive signal came words that no one could mistake for anything but empathy. Message received. Help is on the way. The room fell silent. No one spoke. Then for the first time in weeks, Elder Saren smiled. They heard us. But as the days stretched on, confusion turned to anxiety. The signal's origin didn't match any known Archon routes. The responding fleet was approaching from a region of space the Valorans had never charted, a sector rumored to be barren, home only to unstable stars and forgotten debris. The Dominion noticed too. Their scouts intercepted the transmission and laughed. "The prey calls for help," hissed the Sithrak commander. "Let them. We'll crush their rescuers as we did their fleets." And so the Valorans waited beneath the shadow of their enemies' ships, power grids failing, air turning thin, families hiding beneath the ruins of cities that once sang with light. They prayed the message had not been a cruel echo of false hope. Then came the day the sky changed. At first it was mistaken for another bombardment, bright flashes piercing the clouds. But the light didn't fall downward. It descended with purpose like comets wrapped in steel. 1, then 5, then hundreds. The orbital sensors, long dormant, flickered to life. Their readings made no sense. Unknown ship signatures, energy readings far beyond Velaran scale, and drive trails unlike anything in the database. "They're smaller than Archon cruisers," whispered the technician. "But there are so many." The command bunker fell into stunned silence as a voice, deep, clear, and utterly alien, filled every channel on every frequency. "This is the Human Expeditionary Response Force. Valora Prime, we've received your distress call. Stand by. You are not alone." For the first time in living memory, the Valorans felt something the Dominion had stolen from them. Not just hope, but awe the Archons hadn't come. Something else had. Something unafraid and above the burning world. An armada of strangers began to form, a promise made real, born from a message never meant for them. The first human ships arrived in silence, not because they wanted to sneak in, but because space itself seemed to hold its breath. Against the backdrop of stars, dozens of vessels emerged from slipspace, each one carrying the flags of Earth, Mars, Luna, and colonies far beyond. They were mismatched, military cruisers flying beside retrofitted freighters, medships surrounded by escort gunboats, but together they looked like a storm on the horizon. From the bridge of the UES Valiant, Admiral Kira Holt studied the glowing planet below, Valora Prime, the source of the signal that had somehow slipped through 100 light-years of interference. "Visual confirmation?" she asked. "Yes, Admiral," replied her sensor officer. "And it's bad. Multiple cities in ruins. Heavy orbital presence. Sithrak ships, maybe 24 capital class." Holt exhaled slowly. 24. Against their 15 ships, half of which weren't even designed for combat. Perfect odds. "Broadcast standard hail," she ordered. "Let's see if these bastards like talking." Across the void, the Sithrak flagship rotated to face them. The alien commander's voice came through, snarling, mocking, thick with contempt. "Humans, you're out of your depth. Leave this world or burn with it." Admiral Holt didn't flinch. She'd heard those words before. From pirates, from insurgents, from tyrants who believed power was the same as victory. "Funny," she said, leaning forward. "We were just about to say the same thing." Then she gave the order that would echo through history. "All ships, advance." From orbit, the Valorans watched in disbelief. Their sensors, damaged and flickering, captured glimpses of impossible courage. The human ships didn't form neat formations or rigid patterns. They moved like predators, improvised, unpredictable, alive. The Dominion's fleet opened fire first. Brilliant red beams cut through the darkness, turning the void into molten light. For a heartbeat, the Valorans thought the newcomers were finished. Then humanity answered. The Valiant's forward batteries unleashed a ripple of kinetic fire, hurling tungsten slugs at near relativistic speeds. The Dominion's shields flared, then shattered. The next wave came from the horizon, an old freighter-turned missile carrier flooding the stars with guided ordnance. Behind it, a Martian destroyer dived through debris clouds, firing rail bursts with surgical precision. It wasn't elegance, it was chaos. And it worked. Humanity had never mastered peace, but it had perfected survival. Inside the Valoran command bunker, officers cheered and wept as they watched alien invaders, their unstoppable conquerors, reel under the assault of strangers who fought like fury incarnate. "Who are they?" whispered one technician. "Humans," replied Sarin softly, almost reverently. "The lost ones from the outer systems." On the Valiant, Holt watched as one of her ships, the Dauntless, broke formation to protect a Valoran evacuation shuttle. It caught the brunt of a plasma volley and disintegrated instantly. There was no time to mourn. "Mark that position," Holt said, voice steady. "We finish what they started." Minutes stretched into hours. The battle became a blur of smoke, light, and wreckage. When the final Dominion cruiser detonated, its explosion painted Valora's upper atmosphere in shades of silver and gold. And then, silence again. The Dominion was gone. For the Valorans, the sky had never looked clearer. For humanity, this was just the beginning. Admiral Holt opened a channel to the surface. "Valora Prime, this is Admiral Holt of the United Earth Fleet. Your skies are secure. Request coordinates for humanitarian landing zones." The Valoran reply came through, their voices trembling with disbelief. We didn't even know you existed." "That's all right," Holt said. "Now you do." Somewhere in the galaxy, the story of that day began to spread, of a desperate plea misdialed across the stars, and of a species that answered not with hesitation, but with heart. The message was clear, simple, and unforgettable. Humanity shows up. The first wave of Sithrak reinforcements dropped out of warp space like thunder. Their ships, black and jagged, eclipsed the stars above Valora Prime. Dozens became hundreds. The Dominion hadn't come to fight, they'd come to eradicate. Admiral Holt stood at the Valiant's forward viewport as the tactical display turned red. Hundreds of enemy markers filled the screen. Her officers exchanged grim looks. They'd come to help a dying world. And now they were surrounded by an armada large enough to crush a civilization. "They've got us boxed in," said Lieutenant Shiro, voice tight. "Good," Holt replied. "Saves us the trouble of chasing them." The crew chuckled weakly. It was human humor, grim, defiant, the kind that had carried their species through centuries of chaos. The Dominion fleet opened fire. Plasma beams massive enough to slice moons tore through the void. One struck the horizon, splitting the freighter clean in half. Another burst vaporized a cluster of drones. The rest slammed into human shields, shaking entire ships to their core. But humanity didn't retreat. They charged. The Valiant roared forward, her engines flaring blue-white. Behind her, the Daedalus and Trinity fell into formation. Human ships darted through gaps like wolves among giants, using asteroids, debris, and even shattered hulls as cover. The Sithrak fired wildly, unprepared for such reckless, unpredictable tactics. "Target their weapon arrays," Holt barked. "No clean kills. I want chaos in their ranks." From orbit, the Valorans watched in disbelief. The human fleet wasn't the largest nor the most advanced, but it was alive. Their ships moved like extensions of instinct, each captain improvising, each gunner trusting their own aim. They weren't fighting for territory or glory. They were fighting for someone else's home. On the Dominion flagship, Commander Threx bared his fangs in frustration. Primitive ships. No discipline. Why do they not break? His strategist hissed. "Because, Commander? They don't know how." Moments later, the humans proved her right. The Daedalus executed a suicidal maneuver, diving through the Dominion formation and detonating its reactor at point-blank range. The explosion tore through 3 enemy battleships and blinded their sensors. In that moment, the Valiant led a countercharge straight into the chaos. Railguns screamed. Missile pods flared. EMP bursts crippled entire squadrons. The sky, once black with invaders, became a tapestry of fire. Holt's voice echoed across the fleet-wide comms. "You've all heard their threats. You've seen what they do to the helpless. Well, today they learn what happens when humanity answers a cry for help. Her tone hardened. Today, we make them remember our name. The fleet erupted in cheers. On the surface, Velaran soldiers stood among the ruins, staring upward as burning fragments of Sithrak ships streaked across the atmosphere like falling stars. Every explosion was a promise kept. Every flash of light was proof that their world had not been forgotten. Elder Saren watched the sky, eyes wet with reflection. They fight like the universe owes them nothing, he murmured. And yet they give everything. The Dominion, for the first time in its reign, began to falter. Their formations collapsed, their confidence shattered. They had never faced an enemy that refused to surrender. And when the final Dominion dreadnought attempted to flee, Admiral Holt ordered the Valiant's main railgun to fire one last time. The projectile struck true, splitting the massive warship in half. Silence followed. For the first time in weeks, Velora's sky was clear, but amid the wreckage, one transmission repeated endlessly across every human channel, recorded, archived and remembered for generations. They called for help. We came. The war was over. Above Velora Prime, the wreckage of the Dominion fleet drifted silently in orbit, glowing faintly from the fires still burning in vacuum. The human ships, battered but standing, moved among the debris like caretakers of a graveyard. Down below, the once broken world began to breathe again. The bombardments had stopped. The air was still heavy with ash, but sunlight pierced through for the first time in months. The Velorans emerged from their shelters, blinking at the light, unsure if this peace was real or just another cruel trick of fate. Then they saw the ships in the sky, sleek, metallic, alien, but not threatening. They moved with purpose, descending toward the planet in steady formation. The first human dropships touched down outside the capital ruins. The hatches opened with a hiss and figures in armored suits stepped into the dust. They carried no banners, no trophies, no demands for surrender. Only supplies, medical units, and engineers. The Velorans, fragile, exhausted, watched as one of the humans, a medic, kneeled to help a wounded child. The gesture was simple, wordless, and yet it shattered centuries of arrogance that had ruled the stars. Because for the first time, the Velorans realized what made these beings so dangerous. It wasn't their weapons. It was their hearts. In orbit, Admiral Holt stood on the Valiant's observation deck, gazing down at the world they had saved. Reports of casualties scrolled across her display. Hundreds lost, ships crippled, ammunition nearly exhausted. Her officers gathered quietly behind her. "We won," one of them said softly. "No," Holt replied. "They did. We just showed up." For a moment, no one spoke. Then the communications officer turned, brow furrowed. "Admiral, we're picking up something. Another distress call?" "Yes, ma'am." But he hesitated. "It's from the Dominion." The room fell silent. The defeated invaders, arrogant, merciless, now broken, were sending a signal. Weak, distorted, but clear enough to read. "Request mercy. Request assistance. We surrender." Holt stared at the transmission for a long moment. Around her, the crew waited for her to decide whether to respond or ignore it. She finally spoke. "Patch them through." The Dominion commander's face appeared on the screen, bloodied, humiliated, terrified. "You would help us," he rasped, "after what we've done?" Holt's eyes were hard, but her voice was steady. "You called for help, and we heard you." There was no anger in her tone, only conviction, because that was what humanity was. They didn't answer based on worthiness. They answered because someone needed them. Across the galaxy, the news spread like wildfire. A civilization no one had known existed had risen overnight to destroy a Dominion armada and then offered mercy to the survivors. Star systems whispered their name in disbelief. Trade routes buzzed with rumors. Humans, they came from the outer rim. They fought like demons. They saved a world that wasn't even theirs. The phrase that began as a military transmission soon became a legend, repeated in every corner of space. They called for help. Humanity came. The message repeated endlessly, carried by traders, soldiers, and wanderers, and wherever it reached, hearts stirred, because everyone, somewhere deep down, hoped that if their darkest day ever came, humanity might hear them too. On Valora Prime, Elder Saren stood beneath a rebuilt skyport, watching the last of the human ships preparing to depart. "We owe you everything," he said. Admiral Holt smiled faintly. "Then pay it forward," she said. "Someone else will call one day." And with that, the fleet rose, burning bright against the dawn, leaving behind not conquerors, not saviors, but something far rarer, a promise. Centuries later, every child on Valora Prime learns the same story, not from history books, but from the murals carved into the marble of the rebuilt capital, murals that stretch from the ground to the stars. They tell of a day when the skies burned red, when the Dominion's shadow blotted out the sun, and when salvation arrived not from allies or ancient gods, but from strangers who answered a message that wasn't even meant for them. They call that day the Arrival, and the beings who came to their aid, they call them the humans of the Iron Dawn. In the Great Hall of Remembrance, Elder Saren's words are etched in 100 languages. "We asked for help and the universe sent us humanity." They did not ask who we were, what we could offer, or why we were worth saving. They simply came, and in doing so they reminded the stars what compassion looks like when it wears armor. The Valorans rebuilt slowly. The scars of war never truly vanished, but from the ashes rose something new: courage. They learned from their saviors, adopting human resilience, human engineering, and most importantly, human defiance. No longer did they cower at the sight of danger. No longer did they wait for permission to survive, because they had seen what it meant to stand when standing seemed impossible. Across the galaxy, the legend spread. Sailors told it in orbital bars. Traders whispered it over radio frequencies. Soldiers repeated it before battle. "If you are ever in need," they'd say, "send a call into the dark. Somewhere out there, the humans are listening." Empires that once mocked humanity began to take notice. They studied their technology, their unpredictable warfare, their ability to turn chaos into victory. But what frightened them most wasn't their weapons. It was their will, for every empire's might has limits. But humanity's resolve does not. And so, across centuries, the story of Valora Prime became more than history. It became a warning and a promise. Generations after the battle, a young Valoran cadet asked her instructor, "Why did the humans help us?" "They gained nothing," the instructor smiled. "That's the secret, isn't it? Humans never wait for profit. They act because it's right, because they remember what it's like to be small and to pray that someone out there still cares." She paused, then looked out the viewport where a human-built orbital station glowed like a second moon. "They don't just save lives," she said. "They change what life means." In time, the Dominion rose again, smaller, weaker, but still dangerous. Yet when they returned to Valoran space generations later, they did not attack. They offered tribute, because even the conquerors had learned. They'd seen their might broken not by superior power, but by an idea too vast to kill. And when a Dominion envoy was once asked what they feared most about humans, his answer was simple: they don't conquer, they inspire. Now, when the great Galactic Archive recounts the eras of war and peace, humanity's entry begins with a single line, spoken by the first alien who ever saw them descend from the heavens. "We sent a message for help." And an Armada answered. No other words have ever captured them so perfectly. Because in the end, humanity's strength was never its weapons, its ships, or its armies. It was its heart, the fire that refuses to die, even in the cold of space. And long after their fleets drifted beyond the stars, their legacy remained in every world they touched, a silent vow carried on cosmic winds. No call for help will ever go unanswered again. And that is the story of how one misfired signal reshaped the stars. A desperate call for help, never meant for human ears, answered by a species that refuses to ignore the sound of suffering. Humanity didn't just bring fire and steel, they brought heart. They turned compassion into strategy, hope into a weapon, and left behind a promise that echoes across galaxies. If this story reminded you why we love humanity, forget tales, that raw pride, that spark of what makes us who we are, then don't let it fade here. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we explore more legends, more lost transmissions, and more moments where humanity shows the universe what we're made of. Drop a comment below. Tell us what moment hit you the hardest, and which story you want to hear next, because somewhere out there another signal is waiting to be answered. And together, we'll be the ones who show up. HFY, Reddit stories, sci-fi lore, humanity. Yeah, story time.